Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Out of Spec podcast. You join me, Francie, and Jordan today to talk about some more electric news. And this one is about truck stops, specifically electric ones, of course, and featuring some major solar aspects. Let's plug in. This episode is made possible by the support we get from Fort Collins Kia. If you are in the market for any electric Kia, not only do they never add market adjustments, they will deliver your car to you anywhere in the 48 contiguous states for out-of-spec viewers. More information in the link in the show notes. Hi, Jordan. How have you been?
Great. Been practically living in California for a few weeks now, and man, the urge to move out here is real. But have spent a bit of time covering all sorts of EV things. But specifically, one of them was actually kind of out of the blue. I was up in Bakersfield a couple of weeks ago, and on my way back down, I drove by what was like this cool facility. I was like, "Oh, cool! It says coming soon, electric truck stop." And I was like, "What? That's so awesome!" So I tried to go in, and I was immediately kicked out by security. And I was like, "Oh, okay, they're not open." Uh, and then a week later, I got an email saying grand opening to the electric truck stop in Bakersfield. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's the same stop." So went back up to just north of Bakersfield to WattEV's third or fourth electric truck stop grand opening. They have their first one was in Long Beach, which I think Kyle's actually checked that out, and they have one in San Bernardino. It's hard to keep track because they've all been built this year, or they've all opened. Sorry, this year they've been kind of in progress for a couple of years, and they have like 15 more sites in progress. So I think we're about to see maybe explosion is the wrong word, but a large come to market of electrifying the California corridor with these electric truck stops. And they're fascinating. Maybe it's just because I'm fascinated by big trucks. You know, I'm just the boy I was when I was 6 years old. But like, it's cool to see an electric truck depot more or less and their strategy on it.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I think this is really cool because if we take like a step back and look at the size of this industry, it's hundreds of billions of dollars in like the USA GDP, freight transport specifically. And then also from the environmental side of things, transportation and trucking and hauling and everything from light duty, but also those medium and heavy duty vehicles contribute uh, a high proportion, a majority as a group to these pollutants and greenhouse gases that go into our environment and contribute to climate change. So it's an interesting space to be working in, but also you think about the size of these vehicles and the batteries and the technologies and how that's changing. But I have seen more and more examples from public school buses or public transit buses or trucks, garbage trucks that are going electric. So I'm seeing, okay, we're getting bigger and bigger. And then, of course, we've heard about the Tesla Semi that we haven't seen really super at scale, but I'm really excited to see more and more of these larger fleets electrify. And then, of course, it brings into the question truck stops. So I was looking a little bit more into Watt EV too, because what is this company? Where did they come from? What are they about? And it was interesting because they provide not only the charging infrastructure where they're building a network of infrastructure at strategic locations. You got to think about where these trucking routes are, and also truck as a service where they make heavy duty EV trucks accessible, affordable, and reliable for fleets. So I guess if you don't have your own, you could go to Watt EV to try it out or rent them or use it as a service if you need to transfer stuff. So that's pretty cool because I've been to some conferences where folks are talking about electrifying their larger fleets, whether it's on their distribution center, their private land where they're doing all their work, or they're sending them out onto public roads. It's a huge investment and a big fleet. So perhaps getting to try that first, and then also shipper solutions. So supporting shippers in achieving their ESG goals by hauling freight using heavy duty EV trucks. So they're really in this space, and I really hadn't heard much about them, but like you said, you and Kyle have now seen them. So I'd love for you to tell me more about this depot, because when I think of trucking, I'm like, okay, you need a lot of power. Solar probably isn't an option because solar is a great way to capture energy, but you do have to capture it, and it's not like you get a ton at once unless you have a large array of solar panels. So, can you tell me more about the site, the setup, and maybe the event in general?
Yeah, the event was fairly basic, grand opening, and they made the point in the event of, this is a fun like occasion, but we want it to get to the point where we don't have grand openings anymore because they become so commonplace. They're really trying to, yeah, I guess, really sprinkle these charging stops throughout California. They're really focusing heavily on kind of the LA area and the San Joaquin Valley. Heading up to Sacramento is going to be their next huge one, and actually, I think the biggest one yet. So I'm really hoping to go check that out when it's done and when it opens up. But even this one in Bakersfield, or just north of it, is has a decent amount of land. It's 119 acres, but 100 of those acres are solar. So it is a huge solar entity with a truck stop on it. Now, 19 acres is still a decent size for a truck stop too. And they have a lot of different parking, and they have, one section of it, like the south section, has the 16 chargers with dual cables, so they can do 360 watt combined, or, like, if one cable is being used, or load shared to like 180 kilowatts each. Of course, that does depend on the voltage of the truck. We have 800 and 400 volt trucks in existence, but that's an option for trucks to plug in. Now, some trucks, I think BYD, have like huge batteries that are actually split. And so, in theory, a truck could actually pull up and use two separate chargers and pull in 720 kilowatts, like, effectively. So, that's like a pretty fascinating, fun. It's a whole new world with these trucks, with these large batteries and the capability to pull in a lot more power. But even on those chargers, you're probably sitting there for 2.5 hours or so if you have to really charge up. And so they do have a lounge. They have a place where people can go hang out and just, a lot of truckers do just like stay in their trucks. So if you do have to stop and charge and take a long break, you can. You can do it in your truck or in the lounge. But that's where they also came up with this second idea of truck as a service. So that's where maybe you could do what's called slip seating. A truck and driver could show up with a trailer, and then it's a truck you're renting from WattEV anyways, so you just switch to a different truck from WattEV that's already there, fully charged. So you throw your truck on the charger, switch loads, switch trucks, and you're off again with a full truck. That's called slip seating. In theory, it's a great idea. Truckers, it's kind of mixed. Some really don't like it because it makes sense. Your truck is like, even more than, it's not just like handing someone your personal car. It's like you spend more time in your truck than your home sometimes when you're a heavy duty long haul trucker. So there's some agreement with that, some pushback, but it's kind of like an option, which is cool to have options. But that's where the whole megawatt charger comes in, where it's like that. These other chargers are a bit smaller. Like, the idea is like you unhook your trailer, pull your cab up, and just plug in, and then you retrieve your trailer again. Whereas the megawatt chargers are in these like pull through areas, because you're stopping, pulling up to 1.2 megawatts of power, which charges your battery in like 30 minutes, and then you're gone. So that's a much shorter, almost equivalent to diesel. And some, I mean, diesel, like with huge tanks, it takes a while to fill them. It's not like a regular Prius pulling over for gas. So that's where it gets closer to a typical truck stop. It was with the megawatt. Now, the issue, as many people know, is there's not really any megawatt trucks at the moment, and there's not even a charging standard. It's MCS, megawatt charging standard, is what we've thrown around as a term, but that's not an official standard yet. But Watt EV is pushing to make the standard. They are making all of their own hardware. That was one of my huge questions when I went there. I was like, okay, where are you supplying your hardware from? We know like ABB and all those other companies that are making chargers, Electrify America, ChargePoint. They're all buying chargers from other companies and branding them and deploying them. And it's kind of a mixed experience in some cases for some people. Whereas Watt EV is technically their sister company, Charge America, is making these chargers in house. They're designing them, They're doing the full stack, the hardware, the software. I mean, it's kind of vertically integrated, not quite unlike Tesla's supercharger situation. It's a
Pretty
lot to take
cool.
in.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like a really comprehensive approach to this in a way. And it does make me think of how that industry will change, what the typical patterns of driving and stopovers will be. And you make a good point. Like people live in their cabs, they personalize it and everything. So it's different than a battery swap when the actual seats. What did you call it?
Slip seating.
Slip seating. Okay, yeah, okay. So, really cool. And I wonder, like, how did this site compare to any of the other sites that you've seen before in the EV trucking space?
I haven't seen many, but this is notably a bit bigger. And the way they're able to get away with the solar is the fact that this is, you know, there's a lot of land out there in central California along this. It's a very immense shipping corridor, and that's why they're kind of starting there. They have the backing of, okay, we have lots of truckers actually using this route. They're actively trying to improve the air quality. The head of CARB and the CEC and everything was at this event because San Joaquin Valley is also known for not great air quality. There's a lot of industrial stuff, and these trucks are not clean. Like the electric ones are, but like the standard diesel ones that we're trying to replace are very dirty vehicles. And if you just have tons of these driving all day every day, I mean that should make a notable effect on at least the region. So that's their goal, is starting in California where they have the backing of the incentives. They have a lot of grants and stuff that they're able to procure and use to create these charging hubs. And they even have this whole truck as a service thing is fascinating to me because they're able to approach a company who maybe is EV curious, but they're intimidated by the initial price tag of a truck. But these companies don't necessarily focus on that. When a person's buying a car, it's all about the price of the car. Now, Tesla will try to have the toggle thing that's like, oh, here's the price of the car after your, gas savings and stuff. And that's less useful for some people, but for trucking, it really is what is your cost per mile? That's the bottom dollar. And so with diesel trucks, and then with WattEV doing their truck as a service situation where they buy the truck and then they basically lease or rent the truck out with including charging, including part of the insurance. Like they have this whole setup of like a combination factor, and it comes out to be about the same cost per mile as a diesel. So that's when companies can be approached and maybe be less apprehensive because they see the money, the numbers in front of them, and they're like, "Oh, that makes sense." And WattEV even has like full. Well, the other thing is there's also like incentives and stuff on trucks, just like there are electric cars in California, especially. So they have a literally one of their people, or maybe multiple people on staff. Their entire job is to like focus on incentives and like really figure out how you can work every single thing possible to make this truck more affordable. And I think people are making the point, what if the incentives come down because, the incentives exist right now to try to incentivize people to convert. But what if those incentives start to come down? I think they'll come down also as the technology prices come down. At the moment, electric trucks are way more expensive than diesel. But, we saw this with electric cars. They weren't always this affordable. And now the average electric car is not much different than the average car in general.
Hmm. Yeah, these are all great points. And I'll reference those conferences that I've been to where folks have actually talked about the changes that they've made on their sites. And they've broken it down and they're like, we saved a lot on diesel because, you have to hold diesel, you have to buy it and use it and have like a whole system around it. And then when you just plug in whatever vehicle that they're using on their site, it just changes things around. And there was an emphasis on price is different than cost. Make sure to look over the lifespan of the work that you're doing with this product, with this addition, with this vehicle that you're adding to your setup, because it's different than just the price up front. And of course, we're talking about money, and I'm thinking, okay, where does Watt EV get their money? And I was looking into it, and they have at the end of last year, At the end of last year, they got funded, or they got a financial partnership with Apollo Funds and Vital. So Apollo is they're kind of an investment; they're an asset manager, and then Vital is in the energy sector across the world. They have a lot of different clients. So okay, that's some funding, but they also got $75.6 million in federal grants earlier this year from the US Federal Highway Administration. So that's a whole lot of money. And it does make me wonder, we've seen a lot of news lately about charging companies kind of struggling, but that is mostly in the DC fast charging passenger vehicle industry. Have you seen anything that would kind of give a hint that this might echo in this space of the trucking charging infrastructure industry?
I think this is still in its growth phase, and we're even seeing this with hydrogen. And perhaps another episode we can do at some point is on hydrogen stuff, specifically Toyota. I was out with Long Beach earlier last week, seeing their new Trigen facility, and people were asking. Shell notably has pulled out of the game on hydrogen fueling for passenger vehicles. Now they're only focused on commercial because that's where the money is, apparently. With commercial trucks, we see hydrogen and electric. And I think that multifaceted approach is more like likely to succeed than that same approach for passenger cars. Hydrogen for passenger cars is harder to make a case for, I think. They're fine cars, but it's like you need a lot more varied and specific infrastructure to allow for the vast amount of cars, whereas these trucks are typically following fairly standardized routes. And so having hydrogen stations across the routes makes a bit more sense in the long haul trucking industry and medium haul. And that's actually another approach that WattEV is considering. They're kind of open to everything. They're like, okay, they're actually thinking about having hydrogen at many of these stops eventually, and they're leaving it flexible and available to grow. Even the space I saw the other day with Bakersfield has phase one is like complete, which is those 16 chargers I mentioned on the south side with 32 handles, but then also the, I think, 16 to 20 chargers on the north side. Those are entirely off the grid. They're on their own grid, fed completely by their 5 megawatts of solar. Now, as they grow more phases, they have like the land capability for more than twice as many chargers, but also 8 times more solar. And so they can like really handle some heavy loads. 40 megawatts of solar. Granted, that works when the sun is out, but they also took a different approach with the solar. And many solar farms will use the panels that kind of move with the sun and like oscillate, and those require space between them because otherwise a panel is going to like create shade on another panel, and it needs space to move around. They've chosen an approach where the panels like sit like this, literally right up against each other, so they're just slightly off kilter. And I'll send you an image to show, but they're able to put a lot more panels on the land, and then they have at the moment only like 3.5 megawatt hours of battery capacity, but that's a decent amount of storage. Plus, then they also have the grid connected stuff powered by PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, for grid connections. And they've apparently, one of the big questions is like, okay, can you handle like max load? Like, what if a bunch of trucks show up? Is that going to take the grid down? And no, they've basically over gridded everything. So they've left a huge amount of room for expansion, but also a huge amount of leeway for heavy peak moments. So it seems like they are thinking about a lot of things. Now they are still new, and these depots have just been opening this year. So I'm still curious to see what issues they encounter that they maybe didn't plan for. But either way, it's cool to see them actually kind of spearheading this, and they have, like I said, plans for, well, in the works for 15 something more stations, truck depots. But not only that, they're actually in the paperwork era of working on 12 other states. So it will eventually leave California, and they're actually building one right now in Oregon, which is barely outside California, but they're starting on the West Coast. That's where heavy trucking is, and that's where a lot of the incentives are. But as they figure out their model, they can kind of replicate that model throughout the country. Now, they could just build one in Texas. like right now. But the issue is there's not as many electric trucks in Texas, and so it's like you don't want to like build this infrastructure somewhere where it's just not going to work. And we've seen issues with that. People have received funding and grants to build hydrogen, and it looks really good politically, but then no one uses it. Like they didn't build it where it wasn't like a build it and they will come. It was like build it and maybe someone will show up. I don't know. They didn't really think about the whole strategy. Whereas Watt EV is trying to like that's why even this one is built in phases. Like they could have just done all four phases at once, had like 100 chargers off the bat, 40 megawatts of solar, but as they want to make sure they ramp up with the trucks actually ramping up.
I think that makes sense as an approach is, try to secure as much funding and plan it out as much as you can, but don't grow too fast and have all those growing pains that we've seen happen a lot in this industry. But as you've touched on here, as we have touched on in the past with this potential here, there's a huge potential for impact, and there's a huge potential for actual feasible business models and charging infrastructure that can work because of the nature of medium and long haul trucking that is different from passenger vehicles. All the things like you mentioned, pretty standardized paths, just a different kind of infrastructure, different kind of stopovers, different behaviors, and different technology, more space in the trucks and everything. I'm pretty excited about this space, so I'd love to see them continue and companies like Watt EV continue to push with this because I think like I said, it can just have a huge impact, not only like environmentally but on the industry at large too, to see this kind of large scale product or project go forward successfully.
Yeah, when you talked about we are seeing some challenges with infrastructure in other companies and they're struggling. And I'm wondering slash hoping maybe for their sake that Watt EV is because they're kind of all encompassing, they do their own hardware and they build the infrastructure. It is, I mean, Tesla is one of the few that kind of are doing that entire approach, the software stack, even the communication between the trucks. They're not using the ISO 1511B. I think they might have that capability, but it's really a different type of plug and charge system where most of these truck stops are they're made for Watt EVs partners or their internal trucks, and so anyone can be partners with them. And when you create that partnership, all the trucks are like in a database. And so basically a truck plugs in, they know exactly which company that truck belongs to. It just plugs in and charges immediately. The handshake time was like nothing. And then after that's done, the truck just leaves. And the driver doesn't care about it because he's not paying attention because he's not the one paying for gas anyways, if he was a diesel truck. Usually that billing all happens at the end of the month with those gas cards. Same way with this. At the end of the month, they'll just bill the company that the truck was using to do the charging. And just depending on how that's set up, sometimes it's, the Watt EV truck as a service full thing where that's part of the actually billing of the truck and its useful use and the insurance and everything. That could all be one payment thing, but they're looking at it fairly holistically, and I think that might be kind of a saving grace. And it's cool that they're doing so much of the engineering. I mean, because they're in charge of the whole stack, like the charger, all the screens were working perfectly. And I know they're brand new, but like I've seen brand new stuff from some other companies, and I'm like, oh, that's not going to age well. Like this stuff all pretty much worked, and they even like oriented the chargers to where the screen was like facing north, which means pretty much never in direct sunlight. And like they're paying attention to some things, and the fact that they're trying to spearhead this megawatt charging standard, they're like, look, we need this, and because we need it, we're just going to make it. Like we're going to push to like figure out the standards. They're currently working with two OEMs for trucks on developing trucks that use megawatt. They wouldn't tell me the OEMs, and allegedly maybe a helicopter company. But they're working on the product side and the charging solution side and everything. And they're buying trucks. The trucks that Watt EV owns as their truck as a service is not just like one OEM. And they're so cool. They're like super nerds like we are. They're like, yeah, we just want to try all the trucks and and gain a lot of data in doing that. Figure out how all the trucks work on our chargers. And they're even like, yeah, sometimes we do range tests to see if they're accurate with what the company advertises. And I was like, oh my gosh, we do too. So they're like super nerds like us, and they've got Volvo trucks and Peterbilt, BYD, they have an order of like 50 Tesla semis that, as they start returning to production, they'll start getting those. So they're really checking out all the trucks, the legacy brands, the new brands. They're just curious and excited about trucks, just like kind of we've been with EVs. And so now I'm more curious. Like we focus obviously on the passenger car space. That's a huge space, but I'm very curious about trucking, short, medium, long haul trucking, even cross country trucking, and even other, another podcast at some point should be electric boating, a bit more conversation on that because I've spent some time with ARC recently, and it's like there's so much to do with just the infrastructure of these other types of vehicles that we don't even consider on a daily basis.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, there's so much going on that we have potential to talk about. There's so much to electrify. And I really want to keep an eye on who they partner with and how they partner with them. I know that they had a previous partnership. I'm not sure if it's still existing, both Uber Freight and then a company called CHEP, which is they're in the supply chain solutions industry. So how they're working together, because collaboration is key here. It's really cool that they're manufacturing their own hardware, and how will they also leverage the skills and talents and strengths of other companies into their own business model? Seems like, you like their approach so far and think that they're going about it at least in a pretty proactive way. There's so many already lessons to be taken from this industry and implemented into anyone doing business today so that we don't repeat mistakes that have happened in a new industry with novel technology and just new ways of completely doing things. So best of luck to them. And yeah, seems pretty cool. I'd love to check out the site and maybe even speak to someone from the WattEV team so they can enlighten us a little bit more.
Yeah. If anyone from WattEV is watching, definitely send someone on our show. I think Kyle and you and them should really get into the weeds more. I had kind of a brief initial approach. I took kind of more or less the press release and kind of regurgitated it for you just to give a high level representation of what's going on. But there's so much to unpack. That's why that's why this show is a bit long already, because it's just like I don't even know where to go with this. So hopefully someone from WattEV can come on the show, and hopefully we can do more videos. I'd love to film the site, maybe when it's a bit more complete, and because it was like they were just painting the lines as we were writing in, like they were barely open. So a lot to cover in here, but yeah, appreciate you having me on, Francie, and discussing big trucks.
Course, yeah, big trucks. There's a lot of challenges I'm sure that they faced. There's the whole different aspect of range and charging anxiety when it comes to this kind of freight and transportation and delivery, and completely different industry than just normal everyday people driving their EVs. So would love to dive more into this topic, and I'm sure folks will have questions. So let us know in the comments, or if you have another company that is similar along the lines of this that you think we should look into, please let us know. We would love to do that. And yeah, thanks, Jordan. Have fun in California. You've been there for a while, and I'm sure we'll have some more podcasts with you talking about all the stuff that you've been up to because you've been busy. So
Yeah,
enjoy the rest of your day, Jordan. And thank you, everyone, for plugging in again to the Out of Spec podcast. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time on the next episode. Bye, y'all.
cheers.